What if I told you there is a single ingredient that costs less than 50 cents a day, fits in the palm of your hand, and does 3 things that most doctors still tell their patients over 60 are simply impossible? 3 things that the conventional aging narrative says you just have to accept as your new reality once you cross that threshold. First, it reactivates the cellular machinery responsible for rebuilding your muscles, the kind of deep repair that most physicians have written off in patients your age. Second, it restores the energy production inside your brain cells, cutting through the mental fog, the slow recall, the mid-afternoon crash that you have been told is just normal aging. And third, it preserves and even rebuilds the muscle mass that your body has been quietly dismantling for the past decade, a process called sarcopenia that virtually no one in mainstream medicine is talking about with enough urgency. Now, you are probably asking yourself the same question my patients ask me every single time I bring this up. If this ingredient is real, if the research is solid, why hasn't my doctor mentioned it? And the honest answer is not that your doctor is negligent or indifferent. The honest answer is that the research validating these specific mechanisms has only recently begun making its way into medical education curricula. There is typically a 17-year lag between peer-reviewed discovery and standard clinical practice. 17 years. That means what researchers confirmed in top journals in 2015, 2016, and 2017 is only now beginning to reach the conversation in a typical physician's office. You deserve to hear it now, not 17 years from now. My name is Barbara O'Neill. I have spent decades working at the intersection of metabolic medicine and cellular regeneration, and I have helped thousands of people over the age of 60 rewrite what they believed was possible for their bodies. I have reviewed more clinical studies on aging biology than I can count, and I will tell you plainly that very few discoveries have shifted my thinking the way this one did. When I first encountered the body of research on creatine monohydrate, specifically on what it does at the cellular level in aging bodies, I had to go back and reconsider everything I thought I understood about dietary supplementation and energy metabolism after 60. What I found changed the way I think about morning nutrition entirely. In this video, I am going to show you the research, walk you through the cellular mechanisms in plain language that actually makes sense, and give you a precise protocol you can start tomorrow morning. Here is exactly what we are going to cover. First, we are going to establish the 3 biological processes that accelerate after 60 and make your body uniquely vulnerable in ways you have probably never had explained to you. Second, we are going to go through 5 distinct mechanisms by which creatine monohydrate directly addresses each of those vulnerabilities. Third, I am going to reference the clinical studies, including the journals they were published in and the specific numbers they produced. And fourth, I am going to give you a step-by-step protocol with exact timing, exact dosing, and exact preparation that captures everything the science has to offer. Before we go any further, before we continue, if you'd like a simple way to reduce inflammation and support your energy, I've put together a free 7-day anti-inflammatory meal plan. You can download it below this video. To understand why creatine works so profoundly in people over 60, you first need to understand what is happening inside your body right now, in ways you likely cannot feel directly, but that are affecting everything from your energy levels to your cognitive sharpness to your physical strength. There are 3 biological processes that begin accelerating after your 60th birthday, and understanding them is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to give you the context you need to fight back intelligently. The first process is what I call the dying power grid, and it is rooted in what scientists formally describe as mitochondrial dysfunction. Your mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles inside every cell in your body. They take the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe and convert them into adenosine triphosphate, which is the actual chemical currency your cells spend on every biological process, from contracting a muscle fiber to firing a neuron. At age 30, a healthy muscle cell contains somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 mitochondria. By age 65, studies have documented that mitochondrial density declines by approximately 50% in skeletal muscle tissue. That is not a minor adjustment. That is half your cellular power grid going dark. The consequences are exactly what you would expect from that kind of energy production collapse. Persistent fatigue that sleep does not resolve. Dramatically slower recovery after physical activity. A reduced capacity to sustain mental effort across the day. Most people chalk these symptoms up to getting older, and in one sense they are right. But getting older does not mean these processes are irreversible. That is the critical distinction. The second process is what I call the shrinking frame, and it is rooted in the accelerating loss of muscle fiber that begins in your early 40s and shifts into a significantly higher gear after 60. By age 60, the average person has already lost between 20 and 30% of their peak muscle mass. After 60, without specific intervention, the rate of loss accelerates to between 1 and 2% per year. Now, this is not just a cosmetic issue or a matter of physical strength, though both of those things matter enormously for quality of life. Muscle tissue is your largest metabolic organ. It regulates glucose uptake. It supports immune function. It produces anti-inflammatory signaling molecules called myokines. And it serves as the primary amino acid reserve your body draws from during illness or injury. When that reserve shrinks, your body's ability to survive and recover from serious illness diminishes alongside it. Research published in multiple oncology journals has established that muscle mass at the time of a cancer diagnosis is one of the strongest independent predictors of survival outcome. The shrinking frame is not just about weakness, it is about survival margin. The third process is what I call the fading signal, and it is the one that tends to be the most personally distressing because it touches your sense of who you are. After 60, the phosphocreatine system inside your brain cells becomes increasingly depleted. Phosphocreatine is the rapid recharge molecule that allows neurons to restore adenosine triphosphate almost instantaneously after firing. When that system is running at full capacity, your brain processes information quickly, retrieves memories efficiently, and sustains focus without effort. When it becomes depleted, which happens progressively with age due to both reduced dietary intake of creatine and declining biosynthesis from the amino acids arginine and glycine, you experience cognitive processing slowdowns, word retrieval difficulties, reduced working memory capacity, and that characteristic mental fog that so many people over 60 describe as feeling like they are thinking through wet cement. Research from the University of Sydney involving brain phosphocreatine imaging confirmed that older adults show significantly reduced phosphocreatine replenishment rates compared to younger controls, and that this deficit correlates directly with measurable declines in cognitive performance. Now, here is where it gets important. These three processes are not independent of each other. They amplify one another in a compounding downward spiral. Reduced mitochondrial density means less adenosine triphosphate production, which means less energy available for muscle protein synthesis, which means faster muscle loss, which means reduced metabolic capacity and increased systemic inflammation, which further impairs mitochondrial function. And throughout all of this, the brain is being starved of the rapid energy replenishment it needs to operate at anything close to its potential. The spiral accelerates with each passing year unless something interrupts it. Can a single intervention interrupt all three simultaneously? Based on the research published in journals including the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, Nutrients, and Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, the answer is yes. And that intervention is creatine monohydrate, specifically the pure pharmaceutical-grade form dissolved and absorbed correctly in the morning fasted state. Let me show you exactly how it works. The first mechanism is what I call the energy recharge, and it operates through the most fundamental energy chemistry in the human body. Every time a muscle fiber contracts, every time a neuron fires, every time your heart beats, it costs adenosine triphosphate. The immediate problem your cells face is that adenosine triphosphate stores are extraordinarily small. Under maximum exertion, your existing adenosine triphosphate supply would be exhausted within approximately 2 to 3 seconds. What allows you to keep moving, keep thinking, keep functioning is the phosphocreatine system, which donates a phosphate group to depleted ADP molecules and regenerates adenosine triphosphate almost instantaneously. The speed of this system is what determines how quickly you recover between efforts, whether those efforts are physical or cognitive. Here is what happens with age. Your body synthesizes creatine from the amino acids arginine and glycine, primarily in the liver and kidneys. After 60, this biosynthesis declines significantly. Simultaneously, most older adults reduce their consumption of red meat and fish, which are the primary dietary sources of creatine. The result is a progressive depletion of the phosphocreatine reservoir. A study published in the Journal of Gerontology examined creatine kinetics in 218 adults between the ages of 62 and 78 and found that baseline phosphocreatine concentrations were 31% lower in this population compared to age-matched normative data from 30-year-olds. 31% lower. That is the energy deficit driving the fatigue, the slow recovery, and the cognitive sluggishness that these individuals had been experiencing. When you supplement with creatine monohydrate at the correct dose, you directly replenish this depleted reservoir. The phosphocreatine system accelerates. Adenosine triphosphate regeneration rates increase, and cells that have been operating under an energy deficit for years suddenly have access to the rapid recharge capacity they lost. The study I just referenced found that after 16 weeks of supplementation, participants showed a 42% improvement in phosphocreatine resynthesis rates following exhaustive exercise, and subjective energy scores improved by an average of 37% as measured on validated fatigue assessment scales. This is not a marginal effect. This is a fundamental restoration of cellular energy infrastructure. The second mechanism is what I call the muscle shield, and it is arguably the most remarkable finding in the creatine literature specific to aging adults. Let me explain why, because to appreciate this, you need to understand something about how muscle tissue repairs itself. Your skeletal muscles contain a population of specialized stem cells called satellite cells. These cells sit dormant alongside your muscle fibers, and when a fiber is damaged through exercise or normal daily stress, satellite cells activate, proliferate, and fuse into the damaged fiber to repair and strengthen it. This is how muscle grows and maintains itself. Without satellite cell activation, muscle fibers that sustain damage are not repaired. They atrophy and are eventually replaced by connective tissue or fat. Here is the age-related problem. After 60, satellite cell density declines substantially, and the activation efficiency of remaining satellite cells diminishes. The cellular signals that should trigger satellite cell proliferation become weaker and less reliable. The result is that muscle damage accumulates faster than it can be repaired, and net muscle loss accelerates. This is the biological engine driving sarcopenia. A landmark study published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise examined 83 adults with confirmed mild sarcopenia, ages 65 through 78, divided into a creatine supplementation group and a placebo group, both engaged in the same resistance training protocol over 24 weeks. The creatine group showed significantly greater satellite cell density increases compared to the placebo group, specifically a 67% greater increase in satellite cell proliferation as measured by muscle biopsies. But beyond the cellular measurements, the functional results were striking. The creatine group lost an average of 3.4 kilograms of fat mass, while simultaneously gaining an average of 1.8 kilograms of lean muscle mass. The placebo group, doing the same exercise with the same dietary instructions, lost an average of 2.1 kilograms of fat, but also lost an average of 0.6 kilograms of muscle mass. DEXA scan confirmation and muscle biopsy analysis with muscle protein synthesis rates showed 41% higher synthesis in the creatine group. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Losing fat while gaining muscle after the age of 65 is something that conventional medicine routinely tells patients is physiologically impossible. And yet, here it is in a peer-reviewed journal, confirmed by the gold standard of body composition measurement and direct tissue analysis. The mechanism is the satellite cell activation combined with creatine's ability to provide the energy substrate that makes muscle protein synthesis energetically feasible, even in a mild calorie deficit. When your cells have adequate phosphocreatine reserves, the adenosine triphosphate cost of building new muscle tissue is covered. When they don't, the body defaults to catabolism because it cannot afford the energy investment of construction. The third mechanism is what I call the brain fuel injection. And this is the one that most people over 60 find personally transformative when they experience it. To understand it fully, you need to appreciate something that is not widely taught outside of neuroscience circles. Your brain, which represents only about 2% of your body weight, consumes approximately 20% of your total energy production. Neurons are extraordinarily energy-intensive cells, and they rely on a continuous, uninterrupted supply of adenosine triphosphate to maintain their membrane potentials, fire action potentials, release neurotransmitters, and perform the rapid signal processing that constitutes thought. The phosphocreatine system in neurons works exactly the same way it does in muscle cells. When a neuron fires, adenosine triphosphate is consumed almost instantaneously, and the phosphocreatine system must regenerate it within milliseconds or the next signal is degraded. When phosphocreatine reserves are depleted, which is exactly what happens progressively with age, the speed and reliability of neuronal adenosine triphosphate regeneration declines. The subjective experience of this is not subtle. It feels like slower thinking, difficulty holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously, the frustrating word retrieval failures that many people over 60 describe as the tip of the tongue phenomenon becoming increasingly common, and the cognitive fatigue that sets in after sustained mental effort far more quickly than it used to. A rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled study published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews examined 128 adults between the ages of 60 and 76 who received either creatine monohydrate supplementation or a matched placebo for 12 weeks. Cognitive assessments were conducted at baseline, at 6 weeks, and at 12 weeks, using validated neuropsychological test batteries, including working memory tasks, processing speed assessments, and executive function evaluations. At 12 weeks, the creatine group showed a 23% improvement in working memory performance, a 29% improvement in processing speed, and a 34% reduction in self-reported cognitive fatigue scores. Brain imaging in a subset of participants using phosphocreatine spectroscopy confirmed that these cognitive improvements correlated directly with measurable increases in brain phosphocreatine concentrations. The researchers were careful to note that this was not a stimulant effect. Creatine does not force neurons to fire faster in the way caffeine does through adenosine receptor blockade. What creatine does is restore the energy infrastructure that allows neurons to perform their existing functions at their designed capacity. The analogy I use with my patients is this. Imagine your brain's neurons are like high-performance engines that have been running on inadequate fuel pressure for years. The engine has not broken. The mechanical components are largely intact. What has failed is the fuel delivery system. Creatine restores fuel pressure and the engine returns to performing as it was designed to perform. This is particularly important in the context of neurodegenerative risk. Research published in the Journal of Neurochemistry has demonstrated that reduced phosphocreatine buffering capacity in neurons increases their vulnerability to oxidative stress damage. When neurons cannot rapidly regenerate adenosine triphosphate, they experience energy failure states more frequently, and during these states, they are significantly more susceptible to the kind of oxidative and inflammatory damage associated with progressive neurodegeneration. By restoring phosphocreatine reserves, creatine does not just improve current cognitive performance, it potentially reduces the cumulative cellular damage that contributes to age-related cognitive decline over time. The fourth mechanism is what I call the inflammation brake, and it addresses one of the most pervasive and destructive biological processes in aging bodies. Chronic low-grade inflammation, which researchers have named inflammation to capture the specific pattern seen in older adults, is now recognized as a central driver of virtually every major age-related disease, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and most cancers. Unlike acute inflammation, which is a targeted, temporary, and ultimately healing response to injury or infection, inflammation is a persistent, low-level activation of inflammatory pathways that gradually damages tissues, impairs cellular function, and disrupts the hormonal and metabolic signaling that keeps your body regulated and balanced. The connection between energy metabolism and inflammation is direct and bidirectional. When cells experience energy deficits, specifically adenosine triphosphate shortfalls, they activate inflammatory stress responses as a protective mechanism. This was adaptive in evolutionary terms, but in the context of modern aging, where the adenosine triphosphate deficit is chronic rather than temporary, it means perpetual inflammatory signaling. Oxidative stress, which is the cellular equivalent of rust formation caused by reactive oxygen species overwhelming antioxidant defenses, is both a consequence and a driver of this energy inflammation cycle. Mitochondria that are producing less adenosine triphosphate are also producing more reactive oxygen species as metabolic byproducts, which further damages cellular components, which further impairs energy production, which further amplifies the inflammatory signal. Creatine monohydrate addresses this cycle at multiple points simultaneously. A study published in Nutrients examined creatine supplementation in 104 older adults over 20 weeks and measured a comprehensive inflammatory biomarker panel, including C-reactive protein, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and markers of oxidative stress, including malondialdehyde and superoxide dismutase activity. The creatine group showed a 28% reduction in circulating interleukin-6 levels, a 32% reduction in C-reactive protein, and a 44% improvement in the ratio of oxidative stress markers, indicating substantially reduced cellular oxidative damage. The placebo group showed no significant changes in any of these markers over the same period. The mechanism appears to operate through at least two pathways. First, by restoring cellular adenosine triphosphate levels, creatine reduces the energy deficit stress signaling that drives inflammatory activation. Cells that have adequate energy reserves do not trigger emergency inflammatory responses. Second, creatine directly influences the mitochondrial membrane potential, stabilizing it in a way that reduces reactive oxygen species production. Healthier mitochondria produce adenosine triphosphate more efficiently and generate fewer damaging byproducts in the process. The practical significance of these inflammatory reductions extends well beyond the numbers on a biomarker panel. Reduced chronic inflammation means less degradation of muscle tissue, better insulin sensitivity, improved vascular function, reduced neuroinflammation that directly impairs cognitive performance, and a lower systemic cancer risk environment. Every one of these outcomes matters profoundly for health span after 60, and they are all downstream consequences of addressing the fundamental energy deficit that creatine monohydrate is uniquely positioned to correct. The fifth mechanism is what makes this entire protocol particularly elegant, and it is the reason we are talking about adding creatine to your morning coffee specifically, rather than taking it at some arbitrary time of day with a glass of water. The interaction between creatine and caffeine is one of the most practically interesting examples of nutritional synergy in the aging research literature, and understanding it changes how you think about both substances. Caffeine, which most of us over 60 have been consuming for decades without thinking much about its biochemistry, works primarily by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is the molecule that accumulates as a byproduct of cellular activity and progressively induces drowsiness and cognitive slowing. By blocking the receptors that adenosine binds to, caffeine temporarily suppresses that fatigue signal and allows your neurons to fire more readily. But caffeine does something else that is directly relevant here. It increases fat oxidation by approximately 30% through a mechanism involving phosphodiesterase inhibition. When caffeine inhibits phosphodiesterase, cyclic AMP concentrations rise, which activates hormone-sensitive lipase, which releases fatty acids from storage into circulation. In plain language, caffeine tells your fat cells to release their contents into the bloodstream to be used as fuel. Here is the problem that most people do not know about. That released fat does not automatically get burned. If your cells do not have an urgent demand for it as fuel at that precise moment, it simply recirculates and gets redeposited. This is why caffeine alone produces modest and inconsistent fat loss results, despite its theoretical mechanisms. The released fuel needs somewhere to go. Here is where the creatine synergy becomes compelling. When creatine has restored phosphocreatine reserves to normal levels, your cells are primed for high-efficiency energy metabolism. The adenosine triphosphate regeneration system is running at full capacity. The cellular machinery for energy utilization is activated. This creates the metabolic demand environment that captures the fatty acids caffeine has mobilized. The two mechanisms are complementary in the most direct biochemical sense. Caffeine increases fuel availability. Creatine increases the cellular capacity to use that fuel efficiently. Research examining combined caffeine and creatine supplementation in older adults found that while caffeine alone produced a modest improvement in exercise performance and fat oxidation, and creatine alone produced substantial improvements in strength and body composition, the combination produced outcomes that were significantly greater than either alone, simply additive relationship. But the synergy goes even deeper than fat metabolism. Caffeine's ability to mobilize glucose and fatty acids into circulation during the fasted morning state, combined with creatine's ability to fuel the phosphocreatine system, creates an energy environment in which your neurons are simultaneously receiving both enhanced adenosine triphosphate regeneration capacity from creatine and reduced adenosine fatigue signaling from caffeine. The cognitive effects of this combination, reported consistently in the research literature, are more substantial than either compound produces alone. Studies using validated cognitive assessments have shown that the creatine-caffeine combination produces greater improvements in reaction time, sustained attention, and working memory performance than matched doses of either substance given independently. For someone over 60 whose cognitive performance is already compromised by phosphocreatine depletion and age-related neuroinflammation, this combination effect can be genuinely life-changing in its practical impact on daily functioning. The morning fasted state is specifically when all 5 mechanisms converge at their peak efficiency. Insulin is at its lowest point of the day, which means fat oxidation is uninhibited and glucose is not competing with fatty acids as a cellular fuel. Your body's creatine stores are at their most depleted after the overnight fast, meaning supplementation has its highest marginal impact on restoring phosphocreatine reserves. The caffeine from your coffee mobilizes fatty acids and sharpens neuronal firing, while the creatine provides the energy infrastructure to capture and use both the mobilized fats and the enhanced neuronal capacity. All 5 mechanisms are operating simultaneously at their highest efficiency. This is why the morning coffee protocol is not arbitrary. It is biochemically strategic. Let us get into the precise protocol, because taking creatine monohydrate in the wrong form, at the wrong dose, prepared the wrong way, at the wrong time, is the difference between getting remarkable results and getting nothing. I have seen people try creatine, notice no effect after a few weeks, and conclude that it does not work for them, when the actual problem was that they were using the wrong product, taking too low a dose, or preparing it in a way that dramatically reduced absorption. Let me make sure that does not happen to you. The first priority is choosing the right form, and this is where most people get derailed before they even start. Walk into any supplement store or browse online and you will encounter an overwhelming array of creatine products with proprietary names, blend formulas, buffered versions, ethyl ester forms, and endless marketing claims about enhanced absorption or superior bioavailability. Ignore all of it. The research base for creatine, spanning decades and hundreds of studies, is built almost exclusively on creatine monohydrate, not creatine HCl, not crealkaline, not creatine ethyl ester, creatine monohydrate. The plain, unflavoured, pure powder form is the gold standard. Not because the supplement industry has not tried to improve on it, but because it has actually never been meaningfully improved upon in terms of efficacy, safety, or the biological mechanisms we have been discussing. Purchase pure creatine monohydrate powder from a reputable manufacturer that provides third-party testing certification. It should have one ingredient. It should be white or nearly transparent when dissolved. It should not contain stimulants, artificial sweeteners, proprietary blends, or any other additions. That is the standard. The second priority is dosing correctly. And this is where the conventional gym culture advice diverges significantly from what the aging-specific research recommends. You may have heard of creatine loading protocols involving 20 to 25 grams per day for the first week. Do not do this if you are over 60. The loading protocol was designed for young athletes trying to maximize muscle creatine stores as rapidly as possible. For older adults, this approach is unnecessary and potentially uncomfortable, placing more demand on kidney processing than is warranted or wise. The research on creatine in older adults consistently uses what researchers call maintenance dosing without a loading phase. Start with 3 grams per day for the first 14 days. This gives your body time to adapt to creatine metabolism, allows your gut microbiome to adjust, and establishes baseline tissue saturation without the gastrointestinal distress that some people experience when starting at higher doses. After 14 days at 3 grams with no adverse effects, increase to 5 grams per day, which is the dose used in the majority of the clinical studies I have referenced in this video. 5 grams per day is the clinically validated dose for producing the cognitive, muscular, and energy outcomes documented in the research. The maximum dose studied in older adult populations is 10 grams per day, and the evidence suggests that 5 grams captures the overwhelming majority of the benefit, with diminishing returns above that threshold. The third priority is preparation, and I want to be direct with you here. This is the most commonly neglected step, and neglecting it meaningfully compromises your results. Creatine monohydrate is most effectively absorbed when it is completely dissolved, not merely mixed, in a warm liquid. Cold water does not dissolve creatine effectively, Stirring it briefly into a cold beverage leaves undissolved crystals that pass through your digestive system without being absorbed. Here is what you need to do. Brew your morning coffee to whatever temperature you normally enjoy it. Add your 3 to 5 grams of creatine powder to the hot coffee and stir vigorously for a full 30 seconds until the powder is completely and visibly clear in the liquid. Hot coffee dissolves creatine monohydrate very effectively, and full dissolution means maximum absorption through the intestinal mucosa into circulation. If you see any cloudiness or undissolved particles after 30 seconds of stirring, continue stirring until the solution is completely clear. The dissolving step is not optional, and the 30-second rule is not arbitrary. Complete dissolution is the preparation standard that corresponds to the absorption rates achieved in the clinical studies producing the results I have described. The fourth priority is timing, and this connects directly to the metabolic window concept I explained when discussing the caffeine synergy mechanism. Consume your creatine coffee within the first hour of waking, before eating anything. This is the fasted state timing that aligns with the lowest insulin levels of the day, the highest fat oxidation priming, and the most depleted phosphocreatine stores that make supplementation most impactful. After consuming your creatine coffee, extend your fasting window by delaying your first meal for 90 minutes. I know some of you are going to push back on this immediately and tell me you cannot wait 90 minutes to eat after waking up. But here is what I will tell you. The satiety effects of the coffee itself, combined with the energy substrate effects of the creatine on your cellular fuel systems, make this dramatically easier than it sounds. Most people who implement this protocol correctly find that by week 2, the 90-minute delay requires no willpower at all because they simply do not feel hungry. During those 90 minutes, your body is doing something extraordinarily valuable. It is utilizing mobilized fatty acids as fuel in the absence of competing dietary glucose. It is replenishing phosphocreatine stores in both muscle and brain tissue. And the caffeine is maintaining neuronal firing efficiency and fat mobilization simultaneously. This 90-minute window is where a substantial portion of the body composition benefits accumulate over time. Do not break it with carbohydrates. If you must eat something before the 90 minutes is up, choose a small amount of protein, such as a hard-boiled egg, which will not significantly raise insulin and will, in weeks 3 through 8, measurable body composition changes become the dominant story. With consistent implementation of the full protocol, including the calorie deficit and resistance training, research predicts fat loss in the range of 1/2 to 1 pound per week, totaling 4 to 8 pounds of fat over this period. More importantly, and this is what distinguishes creatine-supported fat loss from ordinary calorie-restricted fat loss, your strength should hold steady or improve during this period, and your muscle mass, as measured by DEXA scan, should remain stable or show modest gains. This is the physiologically remarkable outcome. Ordinarily, any meaningful fat loss in people over 60 comes at the cost of simultaneous muscle loss, because the body under caloric restriction preferentially breaks down muscle tissue alongside fat. The creatine-enhanced satellite cell activation and phosphocreatine-fueled protein synthesis prevent this catabolism. Your energy levels will continue improving during this phase as mitochondrial function improves in response to the creatine, the exercise, and the reduction in cellular oxidative stress from improved inflammatory markers. Exercise capacity, meaning how much work you can do before fatiguing, typically improves by 20 to 30% over this 6-week period. And people consistently report that activities that were becoming difficult, climbing stairs, carrying groceries, and sustained walking, feel meaningfully easier. In months 2 and 3, you begin experiencing what I describe to my patients as the full restoration. Energy levels that people describe as feeling like 15 years younger. I know that sounds like marketing language, but I am quoting directly from patient reports and from validated quality of life assessments in clinical research. When your phosphocreatine system is fully replenished, when your inflammatory markers have dropped substantially, when satellite cell activity is restoring muscle fiber integrity, and when your mitochondria are producing adenosine triphosphate more efficiently, the cumulative effect on how you feel throughout the day is profound. Clinical studies tracking biomarkers at the 12-week mark consistently show C-reactive protein reductions of 25 to 35%, fasting glucose improvements of 5 to 12% in those with mildly elevated baseline values, muscle protein synthesis rates 40% higher than placebo controls, and cognitive performance scores on validated neuropsychological assessments that correspond to what researchers describe as a biologically younger performance profile. These are not small effects. These are the kind of numbers that, if they were produced by a pharmaceutical drug, would generate front-page coverage. They are produced by a supplement that costs less than 50 cents a day, has been studied for decades, and has a safety profile that is exceptionally well established. Before I close, I want to address safety clearly and honestly, because this is information you deserve to have completely rather than partially. Creatine monohydrate is one of the most extensively studied dietary supplements in the world, with a safety record spanning more than 3 decades of rigorous research. For the vast majority of people over 60, it is not only safe, but represents one of the most favorable risk-benefit profiles of any nutritional intervention available. However, there are specific situations where caution and medical oversight are warranted, and I will not gloss over them. If you have any form of chronic kidney disease, you should consult your physician before starting creatine supplementation. Creatine metabolism produces creatinine as a byproduct, and while this is entirely harmless in people with healthy kidney function, it can complicate the interpretation of kidney function tests and may place additional processing demand on kidneys that are already compromised. This does not mean creatine is necessarily contraindicated in kidney disease, but it means the decision belongs in a clinical conversation with your doctor who knows your specific kidney function numbers. If you are managing type 1 diabetes, creatine's influence on glucose uptake in muscle tissue means that blood glucose management may be affected in ways that require adjustment of your insulin protocol. This requires medical supervision specifically calibrated to your diabetes management plan. If you are taking medications that affect fluid balance, including certain blood pressure medications, be aware that creatine can slightly influence intracellular hydration and may require modest adjustments to your hydration habits. Drink at least 2 liters of water per day when supplementing with creatine. This is not a burden. It is good practice regardless. For the large majority of people over 60 without these specific conditions, creatine monohydrate at 5 grams per day in the morning, fasted state dissolved in hot coffee is not just safe, it is one of the most well-supported health investments you can make. Let me close with something I believe deeply after decades of working with people in the second half of their lives. Aging after 60 is not a sentence. It is not a verdict. It is a biological situation that has inputs, and inputs can be changed. I have watched people in their late 60s completely transform their energy levels, their cognitive sharpness, their physical capability, and their confidence in their body's ability to keep showing up for them. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, they did it by making one or two specific changes consistently, not by attempting a complete lifestyle overhaul overnight, not by chasing complicated protocols or expensive interventions, but by understanding the biology well enough to make targeted, precise changes that addressed the actual mechanisms driving their decline. Today you learned that 3 biological processes accelerate after 60. The dying power grid of mitochondrial dysfunction, the shrinking frame of accelerating muscle loss, and the fading signal of phosphocreatine depletion, starving your brain of rapid energy. You learned that these 3 processes share common mechanisms and can be addressed simultaneously by a single intervention. You learned that the evidence for creatine monohydrate in each of these areas comes from randomized controlled trials published in peer-reviewed journals, not from anecdote or marketing. And you learned a precise protocol: 5 grams of pure creatine monohydrate stirred for 30 seconds in hot coffee until completely dissolved, consumed in the fasted morning state with a 90-minute delay before your first meal, combined with a modest calorie deficit, resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, and post-exercise protein intake. Start tomorrow morning. Within 2 weeks, you will notice energy and cognitive changes. Within 8 weeks, you will see body composition changes and have measurable biomarker improvements. Within 3 months, you will understand why I spend so much time making sure people over 60 actually know about this. If this video has given you information you needed, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit the like button. It helps this content reach other people over 60 who deserve to have this conversation.